Welcome to Civics in a Year, the podcast that makes civic literacy fast, accessible, and surprisingly engaging. In just 10 minutes an episode, we'll tackle one of 250 essential questions about American democracy, how it works, why it matters, and what it means for you. Whether you're a student, a teacher, or just someone who wants to better understand your country and your rights, you're in the right place. Civics in a Year is powered by the Civic Literacy Curriculum from the Center for American Civics and is produced in partnership with the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University. Welcome back to Civics in a Year. Today we're talking with Dr. Sean Beienberg about filibusters, which was always something fun for me to teach. My favorite filibuster to show students was Senator Ted Cruz reading Green Eggs and Ham. And longest filibuster for a while was Strom Thurmond filibustering the Civil Rights Act. And until recently, it became Senator Cory Booker. So, Dr. Beienberg, welcome back. First of all, what is a filibuster?
Yeah, so the filibuster, there's actually an older version or an older thing that was also called a filibuster, which was in the 19th century, Americans trying to go overthrow Latin American countries and get them to join the United States. There's a thing called the Filibuster War, where a guy named William Walker, I think, tried to take Nicaragua. A very bizarre movie with Ed Harris was made in the 80s about this, that the first two-thirds of it shot as a period piece, and then suddenly like an Apache helicopter and a tank roll by. Why is this happening? So that's like that's one kind of old-timey filibuster. But for our purposes, the filibuster is a product of Senate rules. The Constitution allows, the filibuster is effectively a debating, I'll call it a tactic, that ostensibly is used to maintain debate. That's its sort of official definition.
It's not in the word filibuster is not in the
Correct.
Constitution.
So the Constitution allows each of the houses to set the rules for their procedures, how they're operating.
Okay.
And so that is the nominal constitutional justification for it. That the Senate basically says you can have unlimited debate in its own rules. That's not a constitutional requirement. I'll come back to what the Constitution has to say about this in a second. But so the filibuster, as most folks know it, is effectively a member of the Senate talking in a way to basically stop consideration or particularly passage of a bill. How it happens is in some sense a weird artifact. In 1805, when Aaron Burr is vice president, he eliminates a motion for a previous question, which is an old parliamentary procedure that just says we can stop debate. So for some reason, they take that out. And so the Senate can basically just keep debating. And eventually folks figure out that this could be potentially a way to, in fact, either stall legislation or particularly if you're running into the end of a legislative session, kill it altogether. So we'll just buy a little extra time. And so I'm not going to list off every sort of example of them, obviously. The classic version actually is, I suppose Ted Cruz, Green Eggs and Ham may have displaced it in popular culture, but everybody has the understanding that it's like Jimmy Stewart in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington,
yes,
where he wants to keep it talking so that he can buy time. And so this is like the heroic version that defenders of the filibuster will say, see, this is what we want. So the filibuster in 1917, when there's an effort to get the United States into World War I, like they're trying to get a declaration of war basically after, the Lusitania gets sunk and the Zimmerman telegram and all that stuff, right? And so members of the Senate that are anti-war, we talked about this when we were talking about Henry Cabot Lodge. He is not one of them, but there are others that are trying to filibuster this. And so the Senate sets a rule saying if 2/3 of us say shut up, you have to shut up. And they call this cloture. And this is the rule for a while. This is the rule that, as you alluded to, some of the efforts to obstruct the Civil Rights Act and some of the other Southern obstruction of civil rights laws, they use this. Now, the problem with that before is if you're filibustering, it's hard. You have to stand up there. You can't say, hey, I'm going to go to the bathroom, I'll be back, or anything like that, right? The closest you can get to relief is calling on one of your friends to like ask you a question, and then they can sort of give.
They can ask like a long question.
They can ask a long question to basically give you time to like drink water or whatever. But you can't step out to like the bathroom or anything like that. You're sort of stuck there. And I'm trying to remember. I don't even think you can sit down. But
nope, you cannot sit down.
But you're supposed to basically, keep going, so you can sort of get a little bit of relief. But you had to stay there, and so there was a cost to this. Like literally a physical cost of
yes.
There's literally a physical cost to this. So you only could really do it on a couple of things. And so it had sort of its own ability to police itself in the sense of you have to pick, because if you're filibustering, you're also stopping the Senate from everything else. Mm-hmm. So you and your crew can't pass anything else, can't pass the budget, you can't pass whatever, right? So there was an incentive to pick, all right, what are like the two things this year that we're going to filibuster? So if you're the South, it makes strategic sense. You're going to filibuster the Civil Rights Act because this is a big deal for you politically. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, there's other stuff that, again, I'm not endorsing the merits of the South and saying this for the record, but like that was a big important thing. You're going to filibuster only a couple big important things. In the 1970s, the United States Senate under Democratic Senator Mike Mansfield says, what if we lower the cost of the filibuster in some ways and raise it in others? And so they create a phenomenon called two-tracking. And this is actually what the modern filibuster is. So I will admit I have little patience when I hear people in the Senate defend and say, we've had the filibuster forever. Now, whether you think there's a case to be made for the filibuster, but the case is not, it's been here forever. Because the one from the 70s is so radically different than the one before. Because in the 70s, they basically say, we will now treat an intent to filibuster as the same as a filibuster, and then we will move on to other legislation. So effectively, again, oversimplifying a little bit, because you good listeners do not care about all the arcana of Senate procedure, but effectively they say, do we want to proceed to consider bill number 1 this year? And somebody will say, I'm going to filibuster that. Are there 3/5 votes to stop that? So they drop the number from 2/3 to 3/5. So in theory, that makes it easier. But no longer do you have to then keep talking. It's like, oh, there's not 3/5 here. If you're the Senate majority leader, now you say, all right, we're just moving on from that piece of legislation and we're moving on to something different. So the practical effect of the modern 1970s filibuster is to basically turn the Senate into requiring 3/5 vote to proceed on any legislation. It creates a de facto supermajority requirement that is limited now by, did you get 60% of the Senate, not do you have to go to the bathroom, right? Like, which was the check before.
Yeah.
And so unsurprisingly, you can look at like little charts of how many times the filibuster was used. And it's a couple times a year, and then it just starts to explode in the 70s. And then the line is almost like exponential, where it just keeps increasing really, really, really aggressively. And members of the Senate start using it for more and more things. So historically, you did not filibuster executive branch nominees. You voted them up, you voted them down. Like, Clarence Thomas was confirmed by like 52-48 or 51-49 or something, right? So they didn't even think to filibuster at that point. The Democrats didn't think to filibuster because you just didn't do that. So you get basically Republicans filibustering more legislation. Democrats begin filibustering executive branch nominees under the George Bush administration and judicial nominees, again, which also wasn't done. So then that sort of moves it into a new category, arguably a qualitatively different category. I did jump over one thing. Sorry. In the 1980s, they recognize and think, ooh, maybe we don't want to be able to filibuster the budget. So we're going to say you can't filibuster that one. So they pass Robert Byrd, who himself had been a fan of the filibuster on against civil rights legislation back in the day. Now he's majority leader from West Virginia. Says you can't filibuster the budget stuff anymore. So this is why there's this insane, deranged effort every year to tuck everything that you can into the budget, the big omnibus budget in the Senate, because you can't filibuster that. So this is like why the only thing that ever happens in the Congress anymore is the budget, or completely like renaming post offices stuff. Because the filibuster basically, I'm being a little exaggerating, but the filibuster basically blocks everything else. But you got your one shot to pass your legislation. You stuff everything you can in it. and you can't filibuster that. So, but jumping back ahead, so Democrats had begun filibustering executive branch and judicial nominees. And
Is this the one that start with Robert Bork?
No, Bork doesn't get filibustered. Bork does get voted down.
But his hearing becomes this
his hearing
circus, essentially.
His hearing becomes a circus about basically judicial qualifications, because everybody recognizes in terms of intellectual qualifications, et cetera, Bork is qualified. He's one of the 5 most influential law professors in the country. He had been the Solicitor General. He had been a federal circuit court judge for a long time, right? Well respected on just the competence. But Bork was one of the early and most aggressive defenders of constitutional originalism. And very famously, Kennedy and Biden, even though Biden had actually quietly promised Bork he'd leave him alone, switches, actually. There's an interview that Biden does the year before saying, I hope Reagan doesn't nominate Bork because that guy's way too smart for us to be able to vote him down and way too qualified. Kennedy does, as far as I know, doesn't say that. But Biden basically has to switch. But yeah, Kennedy goes after him really hard and says, in Robert Bork's America, insert this long list of policy consequences you think would happen. And so Bork goes down quite bitterly. And then they nominate Douglas Ginsburg afterward, who doesn't go down to a filibuster. He gets yanked by Ronald Reagan after it turns out he smoked pot, and Nancy Reagan got mad about that. So that's how Anthony Kennedy ends up on the Supreme Court as the third choice. But yeah, so Robert Bork's failure makes judicial confirmations a lot more contested, which then interacts with the Democrats beginning to we don't want to we let Clarence Thomas on the court. We don't want that to happen again. So they start filibustering judicial nominees, which then leads Republicans to filibuster nominees. And then Democrats say we're going to eliminate it for one kind of judge, and Republicans say, well, if you do it for one kind of judge, then when we're back in power, we're going to eliminate it for the other kind. That's how Neil Gorsuch ends up in the Supreme Court, is they're going to start filibustering him. And so at that point, and I mean, I think that outcome that you can't filibuster nominees is probably a good one. So that that old norm has now been institutionalized, that neither side can filibuster nominees, vote them up or vote them down. But on the rest of legislation, the filibuster still exists, or on legislation, the filibuster still exists. There were some people that said we should end the filibuster for, the Democrats were saying we should end the filibuster, I think, for abortion and voting rights. And then Republicans have said, no, we should end the filibuster for X, Y, and Z limited things, but we can preserve it otherwise. But that idea that you can eliminate it only part way is obviously you either got to do it or you're not going to do it. So, yeah, and this is one where it actually is quite funny to see the rank hypocrisy of the partisans. You line them all up. The journalists and their opinion people are even worse on that. But yeah, watching all the Democrats a few years ago demand the end of the filibuster to then switching it is super important. And Donald Trump's now calling for the end of the filibuster. And I tend to think people are a little too cynical sometimes about politics, which if you know me, I'm very cynical. That's one where we probably aren't cynical enough. The filibuster positioning just literally turns on a dime on that one. So that's the mechanics of it. Now, there is an argument that some make that it's unconstitutional as well.
Oh.
The Constitution actually bans it. Because to the extent that the filibuster creates a de facto supermajority to pass, everywhere that the Constitution actually requires a supermajority, it says so. You need to have a supermajority for treaties. You have to have a different supermajority for ratifying and proposing or ratifying constitutional amendments and so on. And so the argument is that if the Constitution doesn't say a supermajority, that it needs to basically be a majority. I like that argument. I find it probably wishful thinking, but it's a kind of a gray area. It's one that the courts will never get involved in because they're going to say, Senate, you take it up with yourself. But I figured I'd throw that out there as something that is worth considering. The more realistic possibility, I think, rather than completely ending the filibuster, to my mind, probably the better version would be ending the two-tracking and going back to the ancient filibuster of 1973 in ancient history.
Back in the 1900s.
Yeah, but like, I get. There's a case to be made. So Senator John Kyle and I used to co-teach a class. He was a political hero of mine, and this was one of the places that we disagreed, because he was very much for the filibuster, because he argued by forcing something closer to a consensus, this basically means that you're not getting bad legislation, you're forcing buy-in and deliberation. And he argued for various technical reasons, and also from personal experience, he said, actually, it creates a sort of perverse way to make us talk to each other. So he thought it was actually useful. So again, I don't mean to deny that. I'm only disparaging this is how it's always been argument. Like, the filibuster is a product of the mid-1970s. There are many things from the mid-1970s that we have happily forgotten. There are some that are fine, but debate the filibuster sort of on its own merits, not saying the filibuster is not the Electoral College, right? In terms of being like a core constitutional feature from time immemorial. The filibuster as practice is a product of legislative protocols 50 years ago. So take it or leave it on its own merits.
And then, so the last one, Cory Booker's, was 25 hours. The whole purpose of it is to prevent a vote.
Well, so usually what you do is you can even filibuster not just the vote, but even proceeding to take the issue up. So you can stop either one. So I've even seen the most moderate version is you should not be able to filibuster the initial effort to even talk about the thing. Because if you think that the purpose of the filibuster is in fact to have unlimited debate, then if you can't even debate the thing. But you can, according to Senate rules, filibuster even the motion to proceed to debate, not just the final vote itself. So again, in practice, it is effectively just you can't get legislation through if it's 3/5. But technically, you can filibuster at either part, either the final vote or the motion to even take it up for debate.
And the only entity that can get rid of the filibuster is the one that uses the filibuster.
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
That is correct, yes.
Well, nobody said that the U.S. Constitution or politics was boring. Dr. Beienberg, thank you. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Civics in a Year. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with someone who cares about a constitutional republic as much as you do. For more episodes, resources, and updates, follow us on social media or visit us at civics.asu.edu. Make sure to check out the show notes for any relevant links. Special thanks to the United States Marine Band for their performance of the Stars and Stripes Forever. Let's keep building a stronger constitutional republic, one episode at a time.